You've seen the headlines, you've heard all the buzz Ozempic, Mounjaro, Wegovy. I mean, these new weight loss drugs are totally changing the game. But the story of how we even got them, it's even crazier than the drugs themselves. It's like a century-long scientific detective story. And believe me, it starts in a very, very unexpected place.
Okay, so if you've heard any part of the origin story, it's probably this one, right? The biologist, the venomous Gila monster, and this powerful little thing in its blood called a peptide that seemed to help it go for ages without eating. And look, it's an amazing story, and it is true, but it's not the whole story, not by a long shot.
No way. The Gila monster was a huge piece of the puzzle, a total game changer for sure. But the real scientific journey began decades before anyone even thought to look inside a lizard.
So let's start there with the legend, because it's an absolutely crucial part of this whole thing. The Gila monster connection is what took this deep scientific theory and finally turned it into an actual working drug. So what did researchers find? They found this peptide, which is basically just a small piece of a protein in the lizard's venom called exendin. And it turned out to be this incredibly stable version of a hormone our own bodies make. And that discovery led directly to the very first drug in this whole class, exenatide, which got approved way back in 2005 for diabetes. A massive step forward, all thanks to this one lizard. But to really get why these drugs are so powerful, we need to rewind, way before 2005. We're going to jump back almost 100 years to see where the real scientific foundation for all of this was laid. So picture this. It's the 1920s, right around the time insulin itself was first discovered. And scientists noticed something really weird. Something was happening in our gut that they just couldn't explain. They gave it a name, the incretin effect. So the incretin effect is this. If you eat sugar, your body releases a big, healthy burst of insulin. But if you take that exact same amount of sugar and inject it straight into your veins, you get a much, much smaller insulin response. This was a huge clue. It told them that our gut must be sending some kind of amplifier signal to the pancreas, basically saying, hey, food's here, time to make insulin. It was a massive insight into how our bodies work. And this slide just lays it out perfectly. On the left, you eat, your gut sends that amplifier signal, and boom, you get a proper insulin release. On the right, you inject it, there's no gut involved, no signal, and you get this much weaker response. For decades, the identity of this mystery signal is one of the biggest questions in medicine. And then, finally, in the 1980s, they found it. They discovered that a hormone made in our intestines, called GLP-1, was the signal they'd been looking for all along. This was it. This was the key. But it came with one gigantic problem. You see, finding GLP-1 was one thing, but turning it into a medicine that could actually help people, that was a whole different story. Scientists pretty much immediately slammed into a brick wall. 2 minutes. That's it. The half-life of our own natural GLP-1 in our bloodstream is a measly 2 minutes. There's an enzyme in our blood that just shreds it almost instantly. I mean, you could inject it, but it would be gone before it could do anything useful. For a while there, it looked like a complete dead end. But this timeline, this is where you can see the sheer genius at work trying to solve that 2-minute problem. So in the 80s, we've got our natural stuff, gone in 2 minutes. Then 2005, the Gila monster gets us to 2 hours, a huge leap. By 2010, chemists have engineered a new molecule that lasts 13 hours, even better. And then the home run in 2017, semaglutide. That's the stuff in Ozempic, with an incredible half-life of 7 days. From 2 minutes to a whole week. That right there is the breakthrough that made all of this possible. Okay, so scientists built a version of GLP-1 that could actually stick around long enough to do its job. The next question is, how does it trigger so much weight loss? Well, the answer isn't in your stomach or your fat cells, it's in your head. And this is absolutely crucial to understand. These drugs are not some kind of magic fat burner. Their incredible power comes from their ability to talk directly to your brain and just turn down the volume on the hunger signals. The effect is almost entirely about reducing appetite. And they don't just act anywhere in the brain. Nope. Research has zeroed in on 2 very specific, very primitive spots deep in the brainstem. The nucleus of the solitary tract and the area postrema. This is where all the action happens. So why there? Well, it's because these little areas are special. They have a more porous or weaker blood-brain barrier. You can think of it like a security checkpoint with fewer guards. These drug molecules are pretty big, chemically speaking, so they can't get into most of the brain. but they can sneak past the defenses in these specific spots to deliver their message.
And that very specific site of action, that detail right there, also happens to be the perfect explanation for the number one most common side effect: nausea. It's not a random reaction at all. It's a direct consequence of where in the brain this drug is working.
And this slide explains it all. That area postrema, its job is basically to be the brain's poison control center. It samples your blood for toxins, and if it finds something suspicious, it triggers nausea to protect you. So when these GLP-1 drugs activate that same area, the brain kind of thinks, whoa, what's this? And rings the alarm bell. That's the nausea. Over time, the brain usually adapts, which is why it often gets better.
So there's no question these drugs work. They're incredibly effective. But the conversation among experts is now shifting a little because they're looking really closely at the composition of the weight that's being lost. Because when you lose weight fast, you don't just lose fat.
So typically, for any kind of major weight loss, if you're not also doing things like eating a high-protein diet and lifting weights, about a quarter to even a third of the weight that comes off is actually lean muscle. And that's definitely something to think about.
And this has kicked off a really healthy and important debate. On the one hand, a lot of doctors are concerned. Losing muscle can be a real health risk, especially for older adults, since it affects strength and mobility. But on the other hand, there's a strong counterargument that says, well, a lighter body just doesn't need as much muscle to carry itself around. Some muscle loss might just be a natural adaptation. It's a really open question that everyone is studying very closely right now. So, we went from a curious observation in the 1920s to the venom of a desert lizard to an engineered molecule with a 7-day half-life that talks directly to our brainstem. It's just an incredible scientific achievement. But as these drugs become a bigger part of our lives, it opens up a whole new set of questions about what it really means to manage our weight and our health for the long run. And those are the questions we're all going to be exploring together for years to come.